It is now my immense pleasure to introduce my colleague Jonathan Arnott. Now, Jonathan is a member of the Budgetary Committee in the EU Parliament. He's also one of the most prolific speakers of all of the parliamentarians, and he will probably go down in history for using the blue card system to attack fellow speakers from the other political parties, and also using another parliamentary mechanism called Catch the Eye. Now, as a result, his contribution in the EU Parliament ranks, if not the highest, then one of the highest. Now, he is truly standing up for the United Kingdom in the European Parliament, but is also truly representing the North East region and you, its constituents. Please welcome Jonathan Arnott.
Thank you very, very much, Dan, for such a warm and friendly introduction. I'm going to talk to you today about trade, about jobs, and about manufacturing. I'm sure that in a little while, Nigel will be covering the thorny issue of immigration, so I'm going to leave that one. The North East has a proud tradition of manufacturing and trade. Iron mining in Durham dates back at least to 1298. Also in the 13th century, Newcastle was building ships to serve in the National Fleet. By 1378, Newcastle was producing a staggering 15,000 tonnes of coal a year, trading some with continental Europe, some with London. That is the manufacturing heritage that we have in the North East. Dates back for over 700 years, and actually a lot of it goes a lot further than that. Just over 200 years ago, in 1801, there was a small, tiny village. It had just 25 people, really a farm with 4 houses. And for the next couple of decades, nothing really changed. But through iron, through steel, through railways, through a port, through people not afraid of a hard day's work to earn a wage, that tiny village started to grow. It grew so fast that it needed more workers. It brought in workers from outside. There was actually plenty of immigration, but the good kind of immigration, bringing in skills that they needed to grow and to develop with their economy. By the start of the 20th century, that tiny little village from the turn of the 19th century was a booming, vibrant, growing town. And that tiny little village is now better known as Middlesbrough. Iron, steel, fishing, shipbuilding, coal, trains. You know what? I think it would be fair to describe the North East's manufacturing tradition, and I don't know, some kind of northern economic powerhouse. Sadly, governments of Labour and Tories alike for decade after decade have neglected it. The European Union has decimated our fishing by allowing foreign vessels to fish our waters. Speak to the fishermen of Sunderland, the fishermen of Blythe, fishermen anywhere in our region as I have, at least the ones who are still left, and you won't find a single one with a single good thing to say about the European Union, which has devoured their business. Our coal has been destroyed, at least in part, because of the EU. And so now what we do is we import coal. Coal with lower safety standards and actually at a higher cost to the environment. So whilst we've seen our industry under systematic attack over decade after decade, we've found ourselves with the highest unemployment in the entire country. We are now 4 times as far away from the national average unemployment as we were even in 2007. Every time our primary industries are removed, devoured, destroyed, it ravages local communities. In communities like Redcar, the loss of SSI will have a massive and crippling effect. It's not just the fact that 1,700 jobs, 1,700 livelihoods, 1,700 families will be affected directly. It's not even just the suppliers to SSI. I live in Gisborne, just round the corner from Redcar, and I'm seeing evidence of third and fourth hand impact of people who work for or provide services to companies which are suppliers to SSI in Redcar. That third and fourth hand impact shows that when you take 1,700 jobs for a community, you're not just taking jobs, you're taking the heart out of the community. And that's why I back, for example, the work that Councillor Steve Turner, who you've just heard from, is doing, trying to support those local businesses. But why is this happening? Why is steel in Redcar suffering this fate? And yes, EU state aid rules are part of it. It's not the only reason. I believe there are 5 main reasons other than that. Some we can control and some we can't. China is dumping large amounts of steel on world markets. That's forcing steel prices down. Raw materials have a very high price at present. Energy prices are so high in an industry which actually is one of the most energy intensive of any industry in this country. Because the UK is a relatively high wage economy.
Not the right time.
And because actually SSI could, in certain areas, have been more efficient than it has been. So it's a complex issue. But the point about those 5 points is that most of them are temporary. Most of them would have recovered over time. Steel prices won't always be so low, raw materials won't always be so expensive. Most of it is temporary. Some of it, like energy prices, is government policy. But most is temporary. And that's why I believe some form of targeted state aid should have been used to keep the steelworks open. This industry could have become profitable again if the political will were there to do so. But the European Union doesn't allow us to do that. Now, I've heard the claim from Labour in recent days that EU rules aren't a problem for state aid. So I'm going to get technical just for a second. And I promise it's the only time I'll do it today. But let's take a look at the law on this. It comes from Articles 107 and 108 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. Now, the first part of Article 107 says that you can't have, and the quote is, any aid granted by a member state or through state resources in any form whatsoever. So you can't give state aid to your companies. And the reasoning behind that is to do with they believe that it distorts, that it impacts, that what we do to help one of our companies could impact on a company somewhere else in Europe. But you can't do it. It then gives a list of a number of exceptions. For certain areas in Germany after reunification, for heritage sites, for projects of common European interest. I ask, what about the British interest? But none of those exceptions actually match the situation on the ground in SSI in Redcar. Now, the British government could have stretched the point. It could have tried. It could have gone with its begging bowl to the European Commission and said, please will you let us help our own business? Shows just how impotent we've become as a nation, doesn't it? If we are in a position where we have to ask the unelected European Commission for their permission for what the British government might want to do. And that's what the second article, Article 108, is all about. It's about how you ask the Commission in advance for permission, can we please do this? Now, I believe the Conservatives should have tried. They should have gone to Brussels, cap in hand. Frankly, I'd much prefer not to go to Brussels, cap in hand, but just to do it. But if they support the EU and if they support those rules, then at least they could have tried to see if they could get away with it under those rules. It was a long shot, and when Labour say it's easy to provide state aid in these situations, they're selling you snake oil. But how powerless we've become that we can't even help our own industry. What about energy prices? Another big key driver in the problems with SSI. Well, to meet EU targets, we have artificially inflated our energy bills. Now, I'm all in favour of renewable technology, but you get the technology right first and then you introduce it. Artificial EU targets tell us to introduce it first and then get the technology right. We're doing things backwards because we're following their rules. And yes, when we push prices up, and when we close down businesses in the UK, when they then go out to India, we do cut the UK's carbon emissions. But at the same time, we're effectively increasing the carbon emissions in those areas. So even if you accept completely the dogmatic line on cutting carbon emissions and forgetting all of the other factors that go into making a healthy environment, even if you accept every single one of those things, I'm not even sure that the actions that we're taking, that the pain that we're putting ourselves through, are actually really lowering carbon emissions globally anyway. Again, this is the problem with the European Union. But we're still ultimately a trading region. On Friday, the latest UK trade figures were announced. 3 of the top 5 countries that the North East exports to: America, Switzerland, China. Holland was in the list too. But of course that's because goods are often shipped through big container ports like Rotterdam and out to non-EU countries. So of our top 5 export markets in the North East, 3 are outside the European Union, and the 4th only makes the list because it's a dropping off point for trade outside the European Union. Before the European elections, time and time again we saw headlines claiming that Nissan would leave the UK if we left the European Union. Rubbish. The Labour Party hammered it home over and over again. Oh, I know it's rubbish. We said at the time it was complete nonsense. But we've been proven right. Last month, on the Today programme, Paul Wilcox, the chairman of Nissan Europe, was asked whether Nissan's new investment would be the same if we left the EU. He was asked that question 5 times. He said 5 times that Nissan will stay. Firstly, he said, obviously, we have a very long-term commitment. Secondly, today's announcement shows there's a commitment there. Thirdly, we will always support all future policy decisions and they will continue to build on our success. Fourthly, we made a commitment, bring a new luxury car to the plant of Sunderland. And then fifthly, he said, In case there was any doubt, yes, of course, it's a commitment. If we leave the European Union, we're not going to lose business, no matter what the Labour Party scaremongers might say. Does anyone seriously think that Audi, that BMW, that Mercedes would want tariffs put on their cars when selling them to us? Does anyone seriously think the EU would turn their back on the trade guarantees we have by treaty with them? That they would ignore World Trade Organization rules? It doesn't make sense when you think it through. Of course we'd have a free trade deal with Europe. In that respect, nothing would change. No jobs would be lost. Well, maybe mine and Diane's. But I tell you what, I would be happy to put myself out of a job to win this referendum. But what about the rest of the world? The European Union's become this insular, protectionist customs union. It doesn't allow us to negotiate our own free trade deals. Its protectionism means we can't help the poorest countries in the world to develop through trade. The EU imposes trade tariffs on the poorest countries in the world so that it's harder for us to buy their goods and to help them. There's something deeply morally wrong with that, in my view. That insular... It's an insular, inward-looking, little European mindset. Have you ever heard any of the things that they accuse us of if we stand against the European Union? They accuse us of being little Englanders, but they can't see past the borders, not of Europe, but of the European Union, which is a much smaller thing. More trade deals will mean more jobs for this region. That's why businesses in America and Asia say they'd do more trade with the UK if we weren't in the EU. I mean, you've only got to look at tiny Iceland, with a population the size of Newcastle, which has a free trade deal with China. We don't. Switzerland, which has more free trade deals across the globe than we have. They're not in the European Union. They aren't the world's 5th largest economy. We are. If they can stand on their own 2 feet, then let me tell you this, the 5th largest economy in the world certainly can too. I'll just finish with a few words about national identity, which has kind of been brought up today a little bit, hasn't it, by our opponents. Being English and being British are about more than cheering us on in football, cricket or at the Olympics. I believe it's possible for me to love my country without hating anyone else's. It's possible for me to be proud of being English, for me to be proud of being British, proud of how we've led the world in bringing liberty, protecting freedom and delivering justice, how we were the country that led the way in the abolition of slavery, but also to be honest enough to admit that sometimes there have been failings in our history too. It's possible to hate the European Union, but to love Europe, to love its people and cultures. It's okay to want to leave the European Union, not because I'm an isolationist little Englander, and I'm not, but because there's a wider world out there and we're missing out on it. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe there is a future for our nation if we want to make it happen. A future that takes us out of Europe's union and into the world. Thank you.